A new world coming into view. A world in which there is a very real prospect of a new world order.
The new world order does not mean surrendering our national sovereignty or forfeiting our interests.
He took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States of America. By some, he's been called controversial.
How can I convince you when your ears refuse to hear? You turn your heart away from me each time that I draw near. Your eyes refuse to meet with mine, they glance away in fear. As if you should know that your reception is sincere.
Now, keep in mind that some of my guests have been approached by Homeland Security or FBI saying, why are you going on the Clay Douglas show?
My message to those guys, if they're listening this morning, is go get a cup of coffee. Maybe you'll learn something.
We both took the same oath, to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I don't recall there being an expiration date on that.
Well, it doesn't show how can I contain this anguish and this pain. So we left your eyes blinded by the light.
He is the free American, Clay Douglas. Catch the Free American weekdays at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern.
Every time I think about the damage that's been done, the anger wells inside me till I'm almost overcome. I want to tear the moon out of the sky and drop the sun. Why you never so old? I got me a free one.
For the podcast and more details, visit www.freeamerican.com or catch the podcast by phone by calling 832-999-8621.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Free American. I am your host. I am Clay Douglas. And I'm going to start out today with information that I gave you almost 20 years ago. I've interviewed all of the people that are responsible for the research, and the subject material that we've talked about and that I'll talk about again today, we've been talking about all week long, maybe even longer than that, trying to determine who our enemies are. I just had somebody who I invited up on the show that said your country has been taken over by communists. Oh, really? Who are the communists? And the gentleman I chatted with here for a moment or two really didn't know. I said, do you know who they are and who financed them? Oh, but giving up the socialism security junk is hard for people. But it's my socialism. I paid for it. This was done, he says, in 1868 with the 14th Amendment. Banksters and Rothschilds type Jews. It's been a clusterfuck since. Which means you don't know what's going on. It's just like the rest of you. Most of you Americans You've been told you're under a system and it's what I talked about recently. And I'm not, excuse me here. This, I've had Carl Swinson on here, who's narrowed it down. Many of my guests have narrowed it down to the lawyers. We pointed the finger at the Jews. We pointed the finger at Israel. Gee, who gave us Israel? The Balfour Declaration? World War I, World War II? The 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment. You'll probably say there's something about slavery. This was, and we fought the Civil War over slavery. No, we didn't. And the 13th Amendment might have been the most important amendment. It would have saved us 100 years of war. It was probably what the War of 1812 was fought over when England invaded America, burnt down Washington, D.C. But, gee, your history books, your history channels don't talk much about that, do they? Pretty incredible that you can be, that Americans can be kept this ignorant. But the 13th Amendment was found. No lawyers in public office. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States has been altered from its original in order to fool the American public into accepting a government that is mostly illegal in office. The information contained in this show contains stunning revelations that the entire Congress should be deemed illegitimate after evidence that a clandestine plot to alter the United States Constitution has now emerged. In the winter of 1983, archival researcher expert David Dodge and former Baltimore police officer Thomas Dunn were searching for evidence of government corruption in public records stored in the Belfast Library on the coast of Maine. By chance, they discovered the library's oldest authentic copy of the Constitution of the United States, printed in 1825. Both men were stunned to see this document included a 13th Amendment that no longer appears on current copies of the Constitution. Moreover, after studying the amendment's language and historical content, they realized the principal intent of this missing 13th Amendment was to prohibit lawyers from serving in the government. So began a seven-year nationwide search for the truth surrounding the most bizarre constitutional puzzle in American history: the unlawful removal of a ratified amendment from the Constitution of the United States. Since 1983, Dodge and Dunn have uncovered additional copies of the Constitution with the missing 13th Amendment, printed in at least 18 separate publications by 10 different states and territories over 4 decades from 1822 to 1860. In June of 1991, Dodge uncovered the evidence that this missing 13th Amendment had indeed been lawfully ratified by the state of Virginia and was therefore an authentic amendment to the American Constitution. If the evidence is correct and no logical errors have been made, a 13th Amendment restricting lawyers from serving in the government was ratified in 1819 and removed from the U.S. Constitution during the turmoil of the Civil War. Since the amendment was never lawfully repealed, it is still the law today. The implications are enormous. The story of this missing amendment is complex and at times confusing because the political issues and vocabulary of the American Revolution were different from our own. However, there are essentially 2 issues. What does the amendment mean, and was the amendment ratified? But before we consider the issue of ratification, we must first understand the amendment's meaning and consequent current relevance. The meaning of the 13th Amendment, the missing 13th Amendment to the Constitution, reads as follows: If any citizen of the United States shall accept, claim, receive, or retain any title of nobility, honor, or shall, without the consent of Congress, accept and retain any pension, present, office, or emolument of any kind whatsoever from any emperor, king, prince, or foreign power, such person shall cease to be a citizen of the United States and shall be incapable of holding any office or trust or profit under them or either of them. At the first reading, the meaning of the 13th Amendment, also called Title of Nobility Amendment, seems obscure, unimportant. The references to nobility, honor, emperor, king, prince lead us to dismiss this amendment as a petty post-revolution act of spite directed against the British monarchy. The U.S. modern world of Princess Di and Prince Charles make anti-royalist sentiments seem so archaic and quaint that the amendment can be ignored. Not so. Consider some evidence of its historical significance. First, titles of nobility were prohibited in both Article 4 of the Articles of Confederation, 1777, and Article 1, Sections 9 and 10 of the Constitution of the United States in 1787. Second, although already prohibited by the Constitution, an additional title of nobility amendment was proposed in 1789, again in 1810, according to Dodge, who I interviewed almost 20 years ago. Finally ratified in 1819, clearly the Founding Fathers saw such a serious threat in titles of nobility and honors that anyone receiving them would forfeit their citizenship, since the government prohibited titles of nobility several times over 4 decades and went through the amending process. Even though titles of nobility were already prohibited by the Constitution, it's obvious that the amendment carried much more significance than to our family fathers, our founding fathers, than is readily apparent today. Let's check out some of the historical context here. To understand the meaning of this missing 13th Amendment, we must understand its historical context. The era surrounding the American Revolution, we tend to regard the notion of democracy as benign, harmless, and politically unremarkable. But at the time of the American Revolution, King George III and other monarchies of Europe saw democracy as an unnatural, ungodly, ideological threat, every bit as dangerously radical as communism was once regarded by modern Western nations. Just as the 1917 communist revolution in Russia spawned other revolutions around the world, the American Revolution provided an example and incentive for people all over the world to overthrow their European monarchies. Even though the Treaty of Paris ended the Revolutionary War in 1783, the simple fact of our existence threatened the monarchies. The United States stood as a historic role model for other nations that inspired them also to struggle against oppressive monarchies. The French Revolution, 1789 to 1799, and the Polish National Uprising in 1794 were in part encouraged by the American Revolution. Though we stood like a beacon of hope for most of the world, the monarchies regarded the United States as a political typhoid Mary, the principal source of radical democracy that was destroying monarchies around the world. The monarchies must have realized that if the principal source of that infection could be destroyed, the rest of the world might avoid the contagion and the monarchies would be saved. The survival at stake. And remember, the sun never sets on the English Empire. The monarchies sought to destroy or subvert the American system of government. Knowing they couldn't destroy us militarily, they resorted to more covert means of political subversion, employing spies and secret agents skilled in bribery and legal deception. It was perhaps the first Cold War since governments run on money, politicians run on money, and money is the usual enticement to commit treason. Much of the world's counter-revolutionary efforts emanated from English banks. Don't count on it. Talking about the modern banking system here. The essence of banking was once explained by Sir Josiah Stamp, a former president of the Bank of England. The modern banking system manufactures money out of nothing. The process is perhaps the most astounding piece of sleight of hand that was ever invented. Banking was conceived in inequity, and born in sin. Bankers own the earth, take it away from them, but leave them the power to create money, and with the flick of a pen, they will create enough money to buy it back again. Take this great power away from them if you want to continue, or if you want to continue to be slaves of the bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, then let bankers continue to create money and control credit. Now, this has been the situation we've been in for the last 100 years. Some of our presidents, like Andrew Jackson, fought against this, vowed to destroy the banks, and then we fought 2 world wars at the pleasure and the insistence and the manipulations by the same banksters, as I refer to them. Again, let me repeat this. Bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create money, and with a flick of the pen they can create enough money to buy it back. Take this great power away from them if you want, or if you want to continue to be slaves of the bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, then let bankers continue to create money and control credit. The last great abuse of the U.S. banking system caused the Depression of the 1930s. Today's abuses may cause another. Current savings and loan and bank scandals illustrate the ongoing relationship between banks, lawyers, politicians, and government agencies. Look at the current, this was, I believe, in 1991, the current BCCI bank scandal involving lawyer Clark Clifford, politician Jimmy Carter, the Federal Reserve, FDIC, and even the CIA. These scandals are the direct result of years of law breaking by an alliance of bankers and lawyers using their influence and money to corrupt the public process and rob the public. Think you're not being robbed? Guess who's going to pay the bill for the excesses of the S&L's? U.S. taxpayer? You are. The systematic robbery of productive individuals by parasitic bankers and lawyers is not a recent phenomenon. The abuse is a human tradition that predates the Bible and spread from Europe to America despite colonial prohibitions. When the first United States bank was chartered by Congress in 1790, there were only 3 state banks in existence. At one time, banks were prohibited by law in most states because many of the early settlers were all too familiar with the practices of the European goldsmith banks. Goldsmith banks were safe houses used to store clients' gold in exchange for the deposited gold. Customers were issued notes, paper money, and pull out that dollar bill and see what it says on the dollar bill now. A Federal Reserve note. I've got the United States note issued in 1963 by President Kennedy by Executive Order 11110. When the first United States bank was chartered by Congress in 1790, there were only 3 banks in existence. And the goldsmith bankers quickly succumbed to the temptation to issue extra notes not backed by gold. Why? Because the extra notes enriched the bankers by allowing them to buy property with notes for gold that they did not own, gold that did not even exist. Colonists knew that the bankers occasionally printed too much paper money, found themselves over-leveraged, and caused a run on the bank. If the bankers lacked sufficient gold to meet the demand, the paper money became worthless, and the common citizens were left holding the paper and were ruined. Although once leveraged, bankers were sometimes hung. The bankers continued printing extra money to increase their fortunes at the expense of other productive members of society. And that practice continues to this day and offers sweetheart loans to bank insiders and often provides the foundation for deficit spending and the United States federal government unbridled growth. Let's talk about paper money. If the colonists forgot the lessons of the goldsmith bankers, the American Revolution refreshed their memories. To finance the war, Congress authorized the printing of continental bills of credit in an amount not to exceed $200 million. The banks issued another $200 million in paper notes. Ultimately, the value of the paper money fell so low they were soon traded on speculation from 5,000 to 1,000 paper bills for 1 coin. It's often suggested that the U.S. Constitution's prohibition against a paper economy, no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender and the payment of debts was a tool of the wealthy to be worked to the disadvantage of all others. But only in a paper economy can money reproduce itself and increase the claims of the wealthy at the expense of the productive. Paper money, said Patia Webster, polluted the equity of our laws, turned them into engines of oppression, and corrupted the justice of our public administration, destroyed the fortunes of thousands who had confidence in it, enervated the trade, husbandry, and manufactures of U.S. country, and went far to destroy the morality of the U.S. people. Conspiracies. A few examples of the attempts by the monarchies and banks that almost succeeded in destroying the United States. According to the Tennessee laws of 1715 to 1820, Volume 2, page 774, in 1794, the Jay Treaty, the United States agreed to pay 600,000 pounds sterling to King George III's reparations for the American Revolution. The Senate ratified the treaty in secret session and ordered that it not be published. When Benjamin Franklin's grandson published it anyway, the exposure and resulting public uproar so angered the Congress that it passed the Alien and Sedition Act, 1798, so federal judges could prosecute editors and publishers for reporting the truth about the government. Since we had won the Revolutionary War, why would U.S. senators agree to pay reparations to the loser? Why would they agree to pay 600,000 pounds sterling 11 years after the war ended? It doesn't make sense, especially in the light of Senate's secrecy and later fury over being exposed, unless we assume U.S. senators had been bribed to serve the British monarchy and betray the American people. That's subversion. The United States Bank had been opposed by the Jeffersonians from the beginning, but the Federalists, the pro-monarchy party, won out in its establishment. The initial capitalization was $10 million, 80% of which would be owned by federal foreign bankers. Since the bank was authorized to lend up to $20 million, double its paid-in capital, it was a profitable deal for both the government and the bankers, since they could lend and collect interest on the $10 million that didn't exist. However, the European bankers outfoxed the government, and by 1796, the government owed the bank $620 million and was forced to sell its shares. By 1802, the U.S. government owned no stock in the United States Bank. By sheer power of the banks and their ability to influence representative government by economic manipulation and outright bribery was exposed in 1811, when the people discovered that the European banking interest owns 80% of the bank. Congress therefore refused to renew the bank's charter. This led to the withdrawal of $7 million in specie by European investors, and that in turn precipitated an economic depression and the War of 1812. That's destruction. There are undoubtedly other examples of the monarchy's efforts to subvert and destroy the United States. Some are common knowledge. Some remain to be disclosed to the public. For example, David Dodge discovered a book called To VA Law in the Library of the Congress Law Library. According to Dodge, this is an uncatalogued book in the rare book section that reveals a plan to overthrow the constitutional government by secret agreements engineered by the lawyers. This is one of the reasons why the amendment was ratified by Virginia, and the notification lost in the mail there is no public record that this book exists. This may sound surprising, but according to the Gazette in 5/10/91, the Library of Congress has 349,402 uncatalogued rare books and 13.9 million in uncatalogued rare manuscripts. There may be secrets buried in the mass of documents that's even more astonishing than a missing constitutional amendment. Titles of nobility. In seeking to rule the world and destroy the United States, bankers committed many crimes. Foremost among these crimes were fraud, conversion, and plain old theft. To escape prosecution for their crimes, the bankers did the same thing any career criminal does. They hired and formed alliances with the best lawyers and judges money could buy. These alliances, originally forged in Europe, particularly in Great Britain, spread to the colonies and later to the newly formed United States. And by the way, keep in mind that most of your politicians are lawyers, that if this 13th Amendment had been allowed to surface and become public knowledge, they would have been kicked out of the United States. They would not have been allowed to serve as Congress, but since they were allowed to serve in Congress, the lawyers, run by the British Accredited Registry, try to practice law without a Bar Association card. They won't let you. They control your banks. They control your congressmen. Now, despite their criminal foundation, these alliances generated wealth and ultimately respectability. Like any modern member of organized crime, English bankers and lawyers wanted to be admired as legitimate businessmen. All of their criminal fortunes grew. As their criminal fortunes grew, so did their usefulness. So the British monarchy legitimized these thieves by granting them titles of nobility. Kind of like diplomatic immunity. Historically, the British peerage system referred to knights as squires, and to those who bore the knights' shields as esquires. As lances, shields, and physical violence gave way to more civilized means of theft, the pen grew mightier and more profitable than the sword, and the clever wielders of these pens, the bankers and lawyers, came to hold titles of nobility. The most common title was esquire, used even today by some lawyers. In the International Bar Association. In colonial America, attorneys trained attorneys, but most held no title of nobility or no honor. There was no requirement for one to be a lawyer to hold the position of district attorney, attorney general, or judge. A citizen's counsel of choice was not restricted to a lawyer. There were no state or national bar associations. The only organization that certified lawyers was the International Bar Association, the IBA, chartered by the King of England, headquartered in London, and closely associated with the international banking system. Lawyers admitted to the IBA received the rank of esquire, a title of nobility. Esquire was the principal title of nobility which the 13th Amendment sought to prohibit from the United States. Why? Because the title of esquire lawyers was suspect. The loyalty of esquire lawyers was suspect. Bankers and lawyers with an esquire behind their names were agents of the monarchy, members of an organization whose principal purpose were political, not economic, and regarded as with the same awareness that some people today reserve for members of the KGB or the CIA. Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. sought to prohibit the International Bar Association or any other agency that granted titles of nobility from operating in America. But the Constitution neglected to specify a penalty, so the prohibition was ignored, and agents of the monarchy continued to infiltrate and influence the government, as in the Jay Treaty and the U.S. Bank Charter incidents. Therefore, a title of nobility amendment that specified a penalty, loss of citizenship, was proposed in 1789 and again in 1810. The meaning of the amendment was seen in its intent to prohibit persons from having titles of nobility and loyalties to foreign governments and bankers from voting, holding a public office, or using their skill to subvert the government. The missing amendment, as referred to as the Titles of Nobility Amendment, but the second prohibition against honor may be more significant. According to David Dodge, Tom Dunn, and Webster's Dictionary, the archaic definition of honor as used when the 13th Amendment was ratified meant anyone obtaining or having an advantage or a privilege over another. A contemporary example of the honor granted to only a few Americans is the privilege of being a judge. Lawyers can be judges and exercise attendant privileges and powers. Non-lawyers cannot. By prohibiting honors, the missing amendment provides any advantage or privilege that would grant some citizens an unequal opportunity to achieve or exercise political power. Therefore, the second meaning, intent of the 13th Amendment was to ensure political equality among all American citizens by prohibiting anyone, even government officials or judges, from claiming or exercising a special privilege or power and honor over other citizens. If this interpretation is correct, honor would be the key concept in the 13th Amendment. Why? Because titles of nobility may no longer apply in today's political system. The concept of honor remains relevant. For example, anyone who had a specific immunity from lawsuits which were not afforded to all citizens would be enjoying a special privilege and honor and would therefore forfeit his right to vote or hold public office. Think of the immunities from lawsuits that U.S. judges, lawyers, politicians, and bureaucrats currently enjoy. Another example, think of all the special interest legislation that the U.S. government passes. Special interests are simply euphemisms for special privileges or honors. What if implications if restored, if the missing 13th Amendment were restored, special interest and the universe and immunities might be rendered unconstitutional? The prohibition against honors, privileges, would compel the entire government to operate under the same laws as the citizens of this nation without their current personal immunities, honors. U.S. judges and IRS agents would be unable to abuse common citizens without fear of legal liability. If this 13th Amendment were restored, the entire U.S. government would have to conduct itself according to the same standards of decency, respect, law, and liability as the rest of the nation. If this amendment and the term honor were applied today, U.S. government's ability to systematically coerce and abuse the public would be all but eliminated. Imagine a government without special privileges or immunities. How could we describe it? It would be almost like a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Imagine a government whose members were truly accountable to the public. A government that could not systematically exploit its own people. It's unheard of. It's never been done before, not ever in the history of the world. Bear in mind that Senator George Michael of Maine and the U.S. National Archives concede this 13th Amendment was proposed by Congress in 1810. However, they explained that there were 17 states when Congress proposed the Titles of Nobility Amendment, that ratification required the 13 states But since only 12 states supported the amendment, it was not ratified. The government printing office agrees. It currently prints copies of the Constitution, which include the title of nobility amendment as proposed but unratified. Even if this 13th Amendment was never ratified, even if Dodge's and Dunn's research or reasoning is flawed or incomplete, it would still be an extraordinary story. Can you imagine? Can you understand how close the U.S. came to having a political paradise right here on Earth? Do you realize what an extraordinary gift our forebears tried to bequeath to us, how close we came? One vote, one state's vote. The federal government concedes that 12 states voted to ratify this amendment between 1810 and 1812, but they argue that ratification requires 13 states, so the amendment is still born in history unratified for lack of just one state. One more state support, one vote. David Dodge, however, says one more state did ratify, and he claims he has the evidence to prove it. In 1789, the House of Representatives compiled a list of possible constitutional amendments, some of which were ultimately became our Bill of Rights. The House proposed 17. The Senate reduced the list to 12. During this process, that Senator Tristan Dalton of Massachusetts proposed an amendment seeking to prohibit and provide a penalty for any American accepting the title of nobility. RG 46 records of the Senate, although it wasn't passed, it was the first time a title of nobility amendment was proposed. 12 years later, in January 1810, Senator Reed proposed another title of nobility amendment. History of Congress, Proceedings in the State, page 529 to 530, on April 27th, 1810, the Senate voted to pass this 13th Amendment by a vote of 26 to 1. The House resolved in an affirmative, 87 to 3. The following resolve was sent to the states for ratification. If any citizen of the United States shall accept, claim, receive, or retain any title of nobility or honor, or shall, without the consent of Congress, accept and retain any present, pension, office, or emolument of any kind whatever from any emperor, king, prince, or foreign power, read Israel into that, such person shall cease to be a citizen of the United States and shall be incapable of holding any office of trust or profit under them or either of them. The Constitution requires 3/4 of the states to ratify a proposed amendment before it can be added to the Constitution. When Congress proposed the title of nobility amendment in 1810, there were states, 13 of which would have to ratify the amendment to be adopted. According to the National Archives, the following list of 12 states that ratified their dates of ratification: Maryland, December 25th, 1810, Kentucky, January 31st, 1811, Ohio, January 31st, 1811, Delaware, February the 2nd, 1811, Pennsylvania, February 6th, 1811, New Jersey, February 13th, 1811, Vermont, October 24th, 1811, Tennessee, November 21st, 1811, Georgia, December the 13th, 1811, North Carolina, December 23rd, 1811, Massachusetts, February 27th, 1812, New Hampshire, December 10th, 1812. Before a 13th state could ratify, the War of 1812 broke out with England. By the time the war ended in 1814, the British had burned the Capitol, the Library of Congress, and most of the records of the first 38 years of government. Whether there was a connection between the proposed title of a nobility amendment and the War of 1812 is not known. However, the momentum to ratify the proposed amendment was lost in the tumult of war. Then, 4 years later, on December 31st, 1817, the House of Representatives resolved that President Monroe inquire into the status of the amendment. In a letter dated February 6, 1818, President Monroe reported to the House that the Secretary of State, Adams, had written to the governors of Virginia, South Carolina, and Connecticut to tell them that the proposed amendment had been ratified by 12 states and rejected by 2, New York and Rhode Island, and asked the governors to notify him of their legislators' position, House document number 76. This and other letters written by the President and the Secretary of State during the month of February 1818 note that only that the proposed amendment had not yet been ratified. However, these letters would later become crucial because in the absence of additional information, they would be interpreted to mean the amendment was never ratified. On February 28, 1818, Secretary of State Adams reported the rejection of the amendment by South Carolina. There were no further entries regarding the ratification of the 13th Amendment in the Journals of Congress. Whether Virginia ratified is neither confirmed nor denied. Likewise, the search through the executive papers of Governor Preston of Virginia does not reveal any correspondence from Secretary of State Adams. However, there is a journal entry in the Virginia House that the governor presented the House with an official letter and documentation from Washington within a time frame that conceivably includes the receipt of Adams' letter. Again, no evidence of ratification, none of denial. However, on March 10th, 1819, the Virginia legislature passed Act number 280, Virginia House of Virginia Archives of Richmond, miscellaneous file, page 299 for the microfilm. Be it enacted that the General Assembly there shall be published an edition of the laws of this Commonwealth, in which be contained following matters, that is to say, the Constitution of the United States and the amendments thereto. This act was the specific legislative instructions of what, by law, was to be included in the republication special edition of the Virginia Code. The Virginia legislature had already agreed that all acts were to go into effect the same day, the day that the act to republish the Civil Code was enacted. Therefore, the 13th Amendment's official date of ratification would be the date of the republication of Virginia's Civil Code on March 12, 1819. The delegates knew Virginia was the last of 13 states that were necessary for the ratification of the 13th Amendment. They also knew there were powerful forces allied against this ratification, so they took extraordinary measures to make sure it was published in sufficient quantities. 4,000 copies were ordered, almost triple their usual order, and instructed the printer to send a copy to President James Monroe, as well as James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. The printer, Thomas Ritchie, was bonded. He was required to be extremely accurate in his research and his printing, or he would forfeit his bond. In this fashion, Virginia announced the ratification by publication and dissemination of the 13th Amendment of the Constitution. There is a question as to whether Virginia was ever formally notified the Secretary of State that they had ratified the 13th Amendment. Some have argued that because such notification was not received, or at least not recorded, the amendment was therefore not legally ratified. However, printing by the legislature is prima facie evidence of ratification. Further, there is no constitutional requirement that the Secretary of State or anyone else be officially notified to complete the ratification process. The Constitution only requires that 3/4 of the states ratify for an amendment to be added to the Constitution. If 3/4 of the states ratify, the amendment is passed, period. The Constitution is otherwise silent on what procedures should be used to announce, confirm, or communicate the ratification of amendments. Knowing they were the last state to ratify the amendment, the Virginians had every right announce their own and the state's ratification of the amendment by publishing it in a special edition of the Constitution, so they did. The word of Virginia's 1819 ratification spread throughout the states in both Rhode Island and Kentucky, published a new amendment in 1822. Ohio first published in 1824. Maine ordered 10,000 copies of the Constitution with the 13th Amendment to be printed for use in the schools in 1825, and again in 1831 for their census edition. India revised laws of 1831, published the 13th Amendment on page 20. Northwest Territories published in 1833. Ohio published in 1831 and 1833. Then came the Wisconsin Territory in 1839 and the Iowa Territory in 1843. Ohio again in 1848. The Kansas Statutes in 1855. And Nebraska Territory 6 times in a row from 1855 to 1860. So far, David Dodge has identified 11 different states or territories that printed the amendment in 20 separate publications over 41 years. More additions, including this 13th Amendment, are sure to be discovered. Clearly, Dodge is onto something. You might be able to convince some of the people, maybe even all of them, for a little while, that this 13th Amendment was never ratified. Maybe you can show them that the 10 legislatures which ordered it published 18 times we've discovered so far consisted of ignorant politicians who didn't know their amendments from articles. You might even be able to convince the people that our U.S. forefathers never meant to outlaw public servants who pushed people around, accepted bribes or special favors, and looked the other way. Maybe. But before you do, there's an awful lot of evidence to be explained. The amendment disappears. In 1829, the following note appears on page 23, volume 1 of the New York Revised Statutes. In the edition of the laws of the U.S. before referred to, there is an amendment printed as Article 13 prohibiting citizens from accepting titles of nobility or honor, presents, offices from foreign nations, but by a message to the President of the United States on the 4th of February, 1818, in answer to a resolution of the House of Representatives, it appears this amendment had been ratified only by 12 states, therefore not adopted. See volume 4 of the printed papers of the first session of the 15th Congress, number 76. In 1954, a similar note appeared in the Oregon statutes. Both notes refer to the laws of the United States, first volume, page 73 or 74. It is not yet clear whether the 13th Amendment was published in Laws of the United States, first volume, prematurely, by accident, or in anticipation of Virginia's ratification, or as part of a plot to discredit the amendment by making it appear that only 12 states had ratified. Whether the Laws of the United States, Volume 1, carrying the 13th Amendment, was recalled or made up is unknown. In fact, it's not even clear that the specified volume was actually printed. The law of the Library of Congress has no record of its existence. However, because the noted authors reported no further reference to the 13th Amendment after the presidential letter of February 1818, they apparently assumed the ratification had ended in failure at that time. If so, they neglected to seek information on the amendment after 1818 or at the state level, and therefore missed the evidence of Virginia's ratification. This opinion, assuming the presidential letter of February 18th was the last word on this amendment, has persisted to this day. In 1849, Virginia decided to revise the 1819 Civil Code of Virginia, which contained the 13th Amendment, for 30 years. It was at that time that one of the code's revisers, a lawyer named Patton, wrote to the Secretary of the Navy, William B. Preston, asking if the amendment had been ratified or appeared by mistake. Preston wrote to J.M. Clayton, the Secretary of State, who replied that this amendment was not ratified by a sufficient number of states. This conclusion was based on the information that Secretary of State John Quincy Adams had provided the House of Representatives in 1818 before Virginia's ratification in 1819. Even today, Congressional Research Service tells anyone asking about this 13th Amendment the same story, that only 12 states, not the requisite 13, had ratified. However, despite Clay's opinion, the amendment continued to be published in various states and territories for at least another 11 years. The last known publication was in the Nebraska Territory of 1850, and once again the 13th Amendment was caught in the riptides of American politics. South Carolina seceded from the Union in December of 1860, signaling the onset of Civil War. In March 1861, President Abraham Lincoln was inaugurated. Later in 1861, another proposed amendment, also number 13, was signed by President Lincoln. This was the only proposed amendment that was ever signed by a president that resolved to amend, read the 13th Amendment. No amendment shall be made by the Constitution which authorized to give Congress the power to abolish or interfere within any state with the domestic institutions thereof, including that of persons held to labor or service by the laws of the state. In other words, President Lincoln has signed a resolve that would have permitted slavery and upheld statewide rights. Only one state, Illinois, ratified this proposed amendment before the Civil War broke out in 1861. In the tumult of 1865, the original 13th Amendment was finally removed from the Constitution. On January 31st, another 13th Amendment, which prohibited slavery in Section 1 and ended states' right in Section 2, was proposed. On April 9th, the Civil War ended with General Lee's surrender. On April 14th, President Lincoln, who in 1861 had signed the proposed amendment that would have allowed slavery in states' rights, was assassinated. On December 6th, the new 13th Amendment, loudly prohibiting slavery and requiring and quietly surrendering states' rights to the federal government, was ratified, replacing and effectively erasing the original 13th Amendment that had prohibited titles of nobility with honors. To create the present oligarchy ruled by lawyers, which the U.S. now endures, the lawyers first had to remove the 13th Titles of Nobility Amendment that might otherwise have kept them in check. In fact, it was not until after the Civil War and after the disappearance of this 13th Amendment that the American Bar Associations began to appear and exercise political power. Since the unlawful deletion of the 13th Amendment, its deletion from the Constitution is this: since the amendment was never lawfully nullified, it is still in force and effect and is the law of the land. If public support could be awakened, this missing amendment might provide a legal basis to challenging many existing laws and court decisions previously made by lawyers who were unconstitutionally elected and appointed to their positions of power. It might even mean the removal of lawyers from the U.S. government system. At the very least, the missing 13th Amendment demonstrates that 2 centuries earlier, lawyers were recognized as enemies of the people and nation. Some things never change. Those who cannot recall history, heed the warnings of founding fathers in this farewell address. George Washington warned of change by usurpation. For though this, in one instance, may be the instrument of God, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. In 1788, Thomas Jefferson proposed we have a Declaration of Rights similar to Virginia's. 3 of his suggestions were freedom of commerce against monopolies, trial by jury in all cases, and no suspension of habeas corpus. No doubt, Washington's warning and Jefferson's ideas were dismissed as redundant by those who knew the law. Who would have dreamed that the U.S. legal system would become a monopoly against freedom when that was one of the primary causes of the rebellion against King George III. Yet the denial of trial by a jury is now commonplace in the U.S. courts, and habeas corpus for crimes against the state is suspended. By crimes against the state, I refer to political crimes where there is no injured party and the corpus delicti evidence is equally imaginary. The authority to create monopolies was made by the Supreme Court Justice John Marshall et al. During the early 1800s. Judges and lawyers granted to themselves the power to declare the acts of the people unconstitutional, waited until their decision was grandfathered, and then granted themselves a monopoly by creating the bar associations. Though Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution mandates that executive orders and treaties are binding upon the states, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding, the Supreme Court has held that the Bill of Rights is not binding upon the states, and thereby resurrected many of the complaints enumerated in the Declaration of Independence, exactly as Thomas Jefferson foresaw in the notes on the state of Virginia. Our rulers have become corrupt, our people careless. The time for fixing every essential right on a legal basis is now, while our rulers are honest and ourselves united. From the conclusion of this war, we shall be going downhill. It will not then be necessary to resort to every moment to the people for support. They will be forgotten, therefore, and their rights disregarded. They will not forget themselves, but in the sole faculty of making money, or will never think of uniting to effect a due respect for their rights. The shekels, therefore, which shall not be knocked off at the conclusion of this war, will remain on us long, will be made heavier and heavier till our rights shall revive or expire in convulsion. We await the inevitable convulsion. The only two questions remain. Will we fight to revive our rights, or will we meekly submit as our last rights expire, remaining rights expired, surrender to the courts, or perhaps a new world order? Hold on. All right, let's see what we got in here. Good morning, Cyanide. Let's see who we got in this chat room. 67% like. No, you don't have permission. Get the hell out of my room. Harley Ryder, I don't know who you are. And since you don't know how to Got somebody claiming to be a Harley rider in here, and I don't think so. And we'll kick that one too. Why should I let you stay here, Harley Rider? Never heard of you, don't know who you are, don't know if I want you here. Okay, I'll let you stay for a while till you say something stupid and expose yourself as a troll. If you don't do that, you can hang around. Well, 13th Amendment, we probably should have that right on our list of constitutional amendments, and we ought to be pushing for it. Now, let's see what else we've got here. Yeah, this is what I want to do. For those who guide the people are leading them astray, and those who are guided by them are brought to confusion. So it says in your Bible and under Isaiah 9:16.
This is the story of the greatest cover-up in history. Its masterminds are our church leaders. Its target is the American people, and its purpose is to conceal a dark and deadly secret. Because, according to the final chapters of the Bible, Obama will not finish his second term. He is the 44th and last President of the United States. And our country and every American citizen are about to face its greatest tribulation from an enemy crueler and more powerful than ISIS, Al-Qaeda, North Korea, and Iran combined. The church will not say a word of this because it will cause panic and despair among all faithful followers of the word of our Lord. This ancient prophecy is encrypted within the visions of 4 men, chosen to give a very precise and terrible warning to all true Christians and patriots. Therefore, before going any further, I must warn you, what you are about to see is deeply disturbing. Because you are about to see how all the world leaders, their armies, and even financial institutions are silently playing their part in the lead-up to the greatest and darkest event in human history. Most importantly, you will see the exact reason why this prophecy will come true before the 1st of January, 2017. But first, you need to know just who I am for making such shocking statements. My name is Alexander Kane. I am a theology professor working at one of the largest universities in Arkansas. I earned a doctorate degree in theology and ancient history, and I have spent 19 years of my life studying the ancient scriptures, trying to solve one of the greatest mysteries of the Bible. And it all started with one simple question. How come America, the world's only superpower, the greatest evangelical nation on earth, is not even mentioned in the Bible? After all, as we know, the Bible accurately predicts so many other historical events. The 2 world wars, men reaching outer space, the rise and fall of communism, and the return of the Jews to their homeland after centuries of exile. This question haunted me until one day, by chance, I made a startling discovery that connected all the hidden clues. Because the Church teaches us that among all the other historical accounts, the Bible tells the story of ancient Babylon through the words of John the Apostle in the book of Revelation, and through the writings of the prophets Jeremiah and Isaiah. According to the prophets, Babylon reigneth over the kings of the earth. It was a queen among nations, and the lady of kingdoms. It was called the hammer of the whole earth, and it became a center of trade, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. It was the praise of the entire earth, and an astonishment among the nations. And according to the Church, all this happened a long time ago to the ancestors of current-day Iraq. But if this is true, why do the prophets speak of pollution, since there was no pollution in ancient times? Because thou hast destroyed thy land, I have polluted mine inheritance, and given them into thine hand. Babylon will reach space as it mounts up to heaven, and raises its throne above the stars of God. How could an ancient nation reach space when flight was only discovered in the 20th century? Thou art weaned in the multitude of thy counsels. How could Babylon be a democracy weighed down by its huge government when we all know the state of Iraq has never had a real democracy? Babylon is a coastal nation with deep water ports and many rivers. Most of Iraq is a desert and has very limited access to the sea. O that thou dwellest upon many waters, abundant in treasures. The country that can fulfill all these descriptions is obviously not ancient Iraq. The only nation that reached space, has become the world's only superpower, is a democracy with a huge government, a mighty military, pollutes its land and sits on waters abundant in treasures, is the United States of America in present times. But what else do the prophets say about it? Its beginning was unique and awe-inspiring. The U.S. was the first state to break away from the British Empire. America was created out of the former British colonies, a nation made out of many states just like the prophets foretold. We speak the English language, and we are the descendants of the first British colonies. That is why the prophet Jeremiah describes England like a mother to the U.S. in verse 50:12. According to the prophets, the mother of Babylon has the symbol of the lion. The royal symbol of England is a lion. Even the name Babylon or Mystery Babylon is deeply symbolic. Ancient Babylon was a city made great by people who came from all parts of the ancient world. Just like immigrants helped make the United States the world's only superpower. And because the prophets didn't know of the existence of the North American continent at the time of the visions, they called it Mystery Babylon. Babylon is also called Daughter of Chaldea. This is another clue based on the geography and the history of the United States. Chaldea is an area located in the Middle East that was inhabited by Semitic tribes during the time of the prophets. Today, the people of Israel are the most powerful descendants of the family of Semitic tribes, and the U.S. is home to the largest population of Jewish people, just like the prophets foretold. The fact that Jewish people helped the U.S. become the world's only superpower is not secret. 48% of American billionaires are Jewish and have made their wealth in the U.S. contributing to its rise as the world's only superpower. Therefore, the daughter of the Chaldeans is in fact the United States. This is again very, very precise. What about the personification of Babylon in the scriptures as a woman? This clue is one of the most obvious. The scripture says this woman sits atop water, has a golden cup in her right hand, and a crown of 7 rays on her head. And the woman which thou sawest in the great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. The United Nations, in theory, reigns over all the kings of the earth and is situated in New York, the great city where you can see the Statue of Liberty, which is the most well-known landmark in the U.S. and the symbol of Babylon the prophets are referring to. So why then are they also calling it the Whore of Babylon? The key to this clue lies in ancient Roman mythology. Libertas in Latin, liberty in English, is the name of the ancient Roman goddess of personal freedom, especially in sexual matters. She was referred to as the mother of harlots by the famous Roman historian and senator Cicero, and she is considered the matron goddess of prostitution. This means that the Statue of Liberty is actually a statue of a pagan goddess of sexual freedom and prostitution. Therefore, it's no coincidence that the U.S. provides 65% of pornographic movies and adult entertainment to the world and is the country where sexual liberation originated from. It's just like the Bible said, "Thou art given to pleasures, for all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication." It was written that at the end times, Babylon turns upon its heritage and destroys all the principles that made this country great. Because ye were glad, because ye rejoiced, O ye destroyers of thy heritage, because ye are grown fat as the heifer at grass. Our recent administrations have greatly expanded in size. Ye are grown fat, and have instated laws that limit our constitutional freedoms and destroy the capital bases that made this country great. Just think of the Patriot Act, food stamps, and other entitlements. Going on undeclared wars, civil forfeiture, and the list goes on and on. The prophets warn of many other sins of Babylon, for her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by the sorceries were all nations deceived. Stand now with thy enchantments, and with the multitude of thy sorceries. If so be, thou shalt be able to profit. If so be, thou mayest prevail. This clue is also straightforward. Babylon's merchants become great by deceiving all the nations of the earth. Their prophets made them prevail. Incredibly, Babylon's greatest sorcery is the US dollar. The dollar became the world's reserve currency and lifeblood of all international trade after World War II, because it was backed by the biggest gold reserves on Earth. That all changed in 1971 when Nixon took us off the gold standard, the greatest monetary sorcery ever accomplished. And the nations went along and used the dollar for trade, while we kept on printing money until, as some economists like Peter Schiff put it today, the dollar is not worth the paper it's printed on. Because of this, the U.S. could buy and sell the nations of the world, who were all deceived. They give up their wealth and resources for something the Federal Reserve literally creates out of thin air. And so our merchants became the great men of earth, using financial sorceries like bailouts, stock and bond bubbles, quantitative easing, and our national debt that tops $18 trillion. This is why the prophet Isaiah accurately sees Fed, financial and investment brokers, and stock market specialists as astrologers, the stargazers and monthly prognosticators, the sorcerers of Babylon. And in her was found the blood of prophets, and of saints, and of all that were slain upon the earth. The U.S. today is the largest exporter of weapons in the entire world. Babylon sells tools that fuel worldwide bloodshed, and it wages wars covertly or openly seeding destruction on the entire planet. All her wealth and power made the U.S. proud and arrogant, exactly as the prophets foretold. How much she hath glorified herself, and lived deliciously. For she said in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. You have trusted in your wickedness, and have said, no one sees me. Your wisdom and knowledge misled you when you say to yourself, I am, and there is none beside me. That is what we call today American exceptionalism. The U.S. fulfills each ancient prophecy of Babylon to the letter, the superpower that has abandoned its sound foundations and turned to sorcery and sin. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, this he will also reap. Babylon's pride, greed, and wrath will lead to the greatest event in human history, war with the great enemy of Babylon, exactly as the prophets foretold. They come from a far country, from the end of heaven, even the Lord and the weapons of his indignation, to destroy the whole land. For out of the north there cometh up a nation against her, which shall make her land desolate. Go north through the end of heaven, the Arctic pole, and you see Russia, the great enemy of Babylon, the one that according to the Bible will destroy it. This clue is as chilling as the Arctic wind, as it geographically pinpoints the two countries capable of starting World War III. The prophets foretell that, and at the start of this war, Russia will unexpectedly use a very special weapon, the weapon of indignation, against the whole territory of the U.S., a weapon like which the world has never seen. The main question you should ask now is, when will World War III happen? And what exactly is the weapon of indignation? The clues to when this event will happen come from the prophet Daniel. In chapter 11, verse 40, Daniel tells of the two kings who are destined to fight the greatest war in human history at the end times. He calls these two leaders the king of the north and the king of the south. The key to understanding this clue is the fact that in ancient times the birthplace was very important, and this is why Daniel identifies both kings by their birthplace relative to Jerusalem, the place where he had his visions. Vladimir Putin was born in St. Petersburg, Russia, which lies to the north of Jerusalem. Does Putin fulfill the other Bible prophecies about him? And the king shall do according to his will. Putin has absolute power. He controls the media, the military, and the economy of Russia. Neither shall he regard the gods of his fathers, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. It is very important to note that gods is not written with a capital letter, because the gods of the fathers Daniel is talking about are the rulers of communist Russia, Lenin, Marx, and Stalin. These and other communist gods reigned over Russia for 80 years. They were practically worshipped, and pictures and statues of them were everywhere. But, as prophecy foretold, Putin distanced himself from communism and blamed these leaders for their sins against Russia and the Russian people. He shall magnify himself above all. Russian media portrays Putin as a brilliant politician and diplomat, a huntsman and judo expert, above the former communist leaders in every way. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces. During his term, Putin has greatly increased Russian military spending. This is his way of honoring the God of forces. Therefore, Vladimir Putin fulfills all Bible prophecies regarding the King of the North. The remaining question is whether Barack Obama is the King of the South. He was born either in Hawaii or Kenya, depending on who you want to believe, both of which, relative to the equator, are to the south of Jerusalem. And in those times there shall many stand up against the King of the South. The Obama administration has managed to antagonize a lot of countries: Russia, China, North Korea, a big part of the Muslim world, including Syria, Egypt, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, and the list goes on and on. Unfortunately, it is clear that Barack Obama and Vladimir Putin are the kings of prophecy. This means that their war must start before they leave office, and that is January 2017. The end of Babylon is very, very near, and whether or not they know it, both leaders are on track to fulfill their destiny according to Scripture. Because, as Daniel foretold, and at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him. The rush to conflict with Russia over Ukraine is not ordinary geopolitics. It's Obama fulfilling his role according to the Bible. In 2014, CIA backed and funded regime change against the pro-Russian leadership in Ukraine. Because of this, Russia is now in an undeclared war with its eastern neighbor. And just recently, U.S. Army instructors, Humvees, and drones have started arriving in the Ukraine. Russia has warned that arming the Ukrainians could escalate into a real war. Furthermore, When Putin annexed Crimea, the Western powers led by Obama imposed wave after wave of drastic economic sanctions on Russian banking and energy sectors, key parts of Russian economy. Alarmingly, economic sanctions have preceded every U.S. war in the 21st century. Russian finances were targeted when the U.S. signed a secret deal with Saudi Arabia to collapse the price of oil from $100 to close to $50 in order to cripple the Russian economy. Russia is dependent on oil exports, as 40% of its budget comes from it. That is why the Russian currency
Come on, let's go here.
The ruble, lost 50% of its value since August 2014. Russian citizens can now only buy half the stuff they used to afford. As the country goes bankrupt, Putin will have the perfect excuse to fulfill his role according to the Holy Bible. Just like a wild animal cornered and threatened, Russia will attack suddenly and without warning. These are the last months, maybe weeks, before the Russian attack that destroys Mystery Babylon, Obama's America. The Bible warns us about the Russian attack using the weapon of indignation, and how Babylon will feel the fury of this terrible weapon. Unlike anything the world has ever seen before, this weapon will hit our entire country, and all our defenses will be in vain. Though Babylon should mount up to heaven, and though she should fortify the height of her strength, yet the spoilers come unto her. This weapon leaves the military helpless because of equipment
All right. We've got a little difficulty here. Try to get it going here.
Malfunction. How is the hammer of the whole earth cut?
The hammer of the whole earth cut asunder and broken here.
Asunder and broken. The mighty men of Babylon have foreborne to fight, their might hath failed. The broad walls of Babylon shall be utterly broken, and her high gates shall be burned with fire. She hath given her hand, her foundations are fallen.
This is Jeremiah 51, verse 58.
Her walls are thrown down. Because the spoiler is come upon her, even upon Babylon, and her mighty men are taken. Every one of their bows is broken, and this weapon leaves Babylon silent and
in darkness.
In darkness. Sit thou silent, and get thee into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called the lady of kingdoms. There is only
one weapon capable of paralyzing the U.S. military's equipment and plunging our cities into darkness. And I've written about
capable
this
of paralyzing the U.S. military's equipment and leaving an entire continent in total darkness and painful silence. Vladimir
Putin's weapon of indignation is
an
Alright, I'm going to try to
magnetic pulse.
Stop this for a second.
One single weapon will cause the fall of Babylon, America. An EMP or a electromagnetic pulse is an
The EMP, or the electromagnetic pulse, is an electromagnetic discharge that fries sensitive circuits in seconds.
Electromagnetic discharge that fries sensitive circuits in seconds.
Well, we're trying to bring up that clip, but it's on Free American 69. Free American 69 on Facebook. Links are on that. And it's on freeamerican.com. Gentleman that did this is a man by the name of Alexander Kane. He is a theology professor working at one of the largest universities in Arkansas. He says he earned a doctor's degree in theology and ancient history, and for the past 19 years he has studied the ancient scriptures, trying to solve one of the greatest mysteries of the Bible. Started with one simple question: how come the Bible does not say anything about the United States? Now, I also got this. It says, why did the U.S. launch a nuclear missile that would be visible from L.A. without any warning? Was the U.S. government trying to send a message to someone on Saturday night just after sunset? An unarmed nuclear supposedly an unarmed Trident II nuclear missile was fired from a ballistic missile submarine just off the coast of Southern California that was later identified as the USS Kentucky. It was the absolute perfect time Hello. Who are you and why are you calling during my radio show? Let's see if we can figure this one out.
Verizon Wireless. The wireless customer you called is not available at this time. Please try your call again later. Announcement 1, switch 139.
Yeah, just another damn troll or ignorant American. And we'll eliminate that. Again, after sunset on Saturday, it was a perfect time to attract the attention of millions of people living in the Los Angeles area. If it had been fired during the days, the missile would have been far less visible. If it had been fired in the middle of the night, most residents in Southern California would have been asleep. Those that planned the firing of this nuclear missile, or missile, knew that it would be seen by hundreds of thousands of people and it would make headlines over the planet. So why was this done? When the U.S. military established a no-fly zone west of Los Angeles for a week, it raised the eyebrows of many, but nobody expected this. The unarmed, they say, Trident II missile, was fired from the USS Kentucky. It normally carries a nuclear warhead, but this launch was so visible that it could even be seen by people living in Arizona and Nevada. The event was seen in Northern California, Santa Rosa, and as far east as Nevada and Arizona. This shows just how high up the missile must have been. A couple of 100 kilometers at least, I'd think. It was seen west of Los Angeles, moving roughly south to north. That too makes sense. It was probably launched from the ocean hundreds of kilometers west of LA, sent to the north, far away from populated areas. Now the reporter here says, I'm not sure why they didn't do this even further west where no one would see it, but I assume the military has their reasons. Once the missile was launched, photographs and videos of this strange phenomena quickly posted on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Others alerted law enforcement agencies and their local news stations. Nobody knew exactly what was going on, but everyone seemed to recognize that this was not normal. The following comes from a report that was posted on CNN. Panic and speculation spread Saturday night when a bright white light shot through the night skies in Southern California. Panic and speculation spread Saturday night when a bright white light shot through the night skies of Southern California. Residents posted a flurry of videos on social media together with the theories of aliens or meteors. Others made panic calls to law enforcement. Today, the Navy is trying to assure us all that this was perfectly normal, but few people are buying that explanation. Clearly, it was done at a time and location that would create a massive amount of attention. So what kind of message was the government trying to send? Was this a message to the American people? Some are suggesting this, but the writer here says, I tend to agree with Mike Adams of Natural News that this was likely a message to our enemies. Last night's test launch of the Trident missile over Orange County was a stage near a high population area for a tactical reason, to have as many witnesses and videos as possible, sending off a very clear, visible warning to China that says we can destroy you if you don't back off. Trident missile, built by Lockheed Martin, was a thermonuclear missile system, a fleet ballistic missile, with a range of at least 4,000 nautical miles. You can see the Trident missile page on the U.S. Navy website. Just one Trident missile, launched from somewhere in the Pacific, could devastate China with a nuclear strike on Beijing. I also find it an incredibly strange coincidence that this was a Trident missile that was fired, considering the fact that the largest NATO military exercise in 13 years, named Trident Juncture, is also coming to an end right now. The biggest military exercise NATO has held in 13 years, Trident Juncture, will end tomorrow. DW claims that even though 36,000 soldiers from various NATO countries, including the U.S., have participated in the exercise to defend against Russian military ambitions, or what other outlets are simply referring to as Russian aggression, the organization is actually at a big disadvantage against Russia, not only because it's trying to coordinate 28 member states with different priorities, but Russia's training events in the last 2 years have involved up to 80,000 soldiers, more than twice that of NATO. All of this comes at a time when our relationships with China and Russia are going downhill very rapidly. And the author here has got a couple of other articles. Is Barack Obama actually trying to start World War III? Most Americans don't realize this, but there's a very real possibility we could eventually go to war with China. And Mike Adams of Natural News believes we're already in an undeclared state of war with China. Right now, the United States and China are in an undeclared state of war. China stands ready to strike the U.S. with nuclear warheads and high-altitude EMP weapons that would destroy the U.S. power grid and cause 90% casualty across the unprepared population. Legendary American journalist Ted Koppel has even written a book about this entitled Lights Out, a Cyber Attack, a Nation Underprepared. Let's hope that World War III does not start anytime soon, but without a doubt our leaders are becoming increasingly reckless, and at some point there may be an accident. I think that accident that just happened up in Montana is a perfect metaphor for how reckless the U.S. has become. An article posted by Air Force Times is reporting that a vehicle that may or may not have been carrying a nuclear weapon was recently rear-ended by a security vehicle. It's possibly the most heart-stopping fender bender ever posted on YouTube. An Air Force tractor trailer that may or may not be carrying a nuclear weapon rear-ended by a security vehicle. In Great Falls, Montana, resident Aaron Tutford videotaped the convoy of at least 2 police vehicles, a security forces truck, a Humvee, and 6 security forces Bearcat vehicles, escorting a white tractor trailer through Great Falls when the minor accident happened on Monday afternoon. Tutford later wrote on Facebook that several helicopters were also flying overhead at the time. The Air Force would not say what was inside the tractor trailer that was rear-ended, but Tetford believed it was a nuclear weapon. Maelstrom Air Force Base, which is located near Great Falls, is home to the 341st Missile Wing, Humvees and Bearcats from Maelstrom's 341st Security Forces Group often escort nuclear weapons when they're being transported. Now, I don't know about you, but I have a really bad feeling about what is happening. Our government is acting very irrationally, and both Russia and China are becoming very angry with us. Then somebody's saying that this Navy test missile is the official explanation is a lie. Talking about this mysterious bright light in the sky has sent Californians into a panic, reports the BBC. The video posted online shows a bright flare rising high before a wide, bright blue flash emerges into a cone shape. Many videos continued to track the light for several minutes. Last night, Californians immediately leapt to the social media to post their theories of the phenomena, ranging from a nuclear missile attack to meteors. Law agencies and news media in San Diego were flooded with calls about 6 p.m. from people reporting everything from a flare to a comet to a nuclear bomb in the western skies, reports the San Diego Union Tribune. Just a day earlier, the FAA issued flight restrictions for the Los Angeles International Airport, denying aircraft access to one of the most frequent approach paths for international and domestic travel. The official explanation is a lie. The official explanation of this event, and remember that official explanations are almost always cover stories, is that the U.S. Navy launched a test missile because they were routinely test missiles. The media in California confirmed that the light came from an unarmed Trident missile fired from the U.S. Navy Kentucky submarine, USS Kentucky Navy submarine. While they call the missile unarmed, they fail to mention that Trident missile normally carries a thermonuclear warhead. There's also no way for the media to know whether this missile was really unarmed or not, as the sole source on the question is the U.S. Navy itself. Apparently, the media thinks the public is so incredibly stupid they'll believe that the U.S. Navy has nowhere else to launch a test missile other than right next to Los Angeles. Somewhere we're supposed to believe the entire Pacific Ocean won't work for such a test launch. They have to launch it adjacent to the airport and thereby inconvenience commercial aviation traffic for an entire week. Obviously, the official cover story is pure bunk. What is the real story behind this? It has to do with China and the covert war that was already underway between China, the U.S., and Russia. Chinese military submarines are a huge threat to U.S. security. And to get up to speed with what's really happening, read this report from the Congressional Record Service, authored by Ronald O'Rourke, Specialist in Naval Affairs, just released on September 21st, 2015. The report is entitled China Naval Modernization Implications for the U.S. Navy Capabilities. Alright, let me see if I can get any of what we were just predicting back here. Give you one more since the computers are getting hung up here. George Soros spoke at the INET Economic Conference. During an interview, he declared that global government was failing. Well, we can certainly hope that is true. And no, that's not working either. At any rate, we've got the predictions, global war, some of it out of the Bible, some of it from the news, mainstream media. But stay tuned to the Free American, and you will get accurate information that they don't really want you to know about. I am Clay Douglas. I am the Free American. And I'm out of here.